Good afternoon, and welcome to another contagious episode of Diatribes from the Voice of Doom. Now here's your bucolic and placid host, Voice of Doom. Hi. Gonna do another one. It's between holidays, or it's pre-holiday. Just had a little Christmas party yesterday with my coworkers. It was good fun. And the food was good. But we didn't have alcohol because it was a daytime party and most of us had to work. So it wasn't as fun as it could have been. But we won't speak of such things. It's human nature to celebrate in the winter solstice time of year for reasons that are natural to society. It has to do with seasons, it has to do with reaping and sowing, and it has to do with just keeping your spirits up. And you can pair any religious practice with those holidays. They seem to all kind of fall together. But I wanted to talk about nature because my first diatribe, I explained very carefully why we're failing. And one of my main theses, along with the two tribes being the first, is our relationship with nature. Now, I've explained over and over through the past 100 diatribes, 200, that life and all phenomena are connected. Nature and existence is connected. And there's a certain pattern, there's certain things that happen. Some are good and some are bad. Nature takes its course. Now, as I've watched, my main thesis, I should tell you, is that we worked for centuries to try to understand nature. And when we started to understand a little bit, we decided to try to control nature, which to a certain extent is good, because you control the floodwaters, you control, you make certain provisions so that fires aren't quite as bad as they could be, or you create inoculations to eradicate and or ameliorate certain ailments. So it's good, but then when you start saying we don't just want to control nature, we want to change nature, then you're getting into an area which is fraught with peril. And I'm convinced that even though many people, probably most people, profess a belief in God, whatever that means, call it what you will, they don't really believe, because if they did, they wouldn't try so hard to change nature, because if God isn't nature, at least God created nature. And by nature, I mean the entire pattern of natural phenomena. And apparently we don't put any stock in God's wisdom or his plan, because we decided we want to circumvent things and change things, and we are. Now, I'm going to give you a little history, going to a kind of a different subject. It's an offshoot of what I just said. Now, H5N1 is the avian flu. It was discovered in China, of all places, in 1966, when geese and birds were dying. But they didn't take much heed of that until it reached humans in 1997. And they do have reasonably effective vaccines, which were introduced in 2007. So there was a 10-year time span between when we thought H5N1 was discovered to be a threat to humanity, and there was a 10-year gap until the vaccine came out. Now, I know we're much smarter than we were back in '07, so we can get things done faster, but sometimes things don't take as long, or sometimes things take forever, because in 1966, a virus called HIV broke out in Africa, and it became I'll say epidemic in the 80s, and it was devastating. No vaccine has yet been developed. So it's been almost as long as I've been on this planet that it's been around, and yet no vaccine. Now, H1N1, I don't know the year it was actually first discovered, but there was a mass vax in 2009, and there was so many adverse effects from this substance called Pandemrix, real catchy, that they had to discontinue that. It's a bit of a problem with Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a nervous system. Affects the nervous system and the muscles. It's not good. Dengue fever has been around, dengue fever has been around since 1779. They created a vaccine in 2017 which increased the cases. It took them 200 and some odd years, 240 years, okay, to create a vaccine that didn't work, that made things worse. Zika was first discovered in 2015. They are in clinical trials, but they're still afraid of the preponderance of Guillain-Barré syndrome. So I find it interesting that we discovered the means to eradicate COVID-19 in such a short time. And the clinical trials were kind of tied in with the distribution and mass distribution of the vaccine, which is good, because if it works, there's no sense in waiting. And you may as well kill two birds with one stone, have the clinical trial and the mass administration of the vaccine at the same time. You save a lot of time and energy. But be that as it may, trying to change nature, and by changing nature, I think we're trying to change God to have him bend to our will, or they, or whatever you want to call X. And that's why they have Merry Xmas, is because it's gender neutral. At any rate, I've been looking at the evolution of this pandemic since it's reared its ugly head and became apparent that it was going to be a problem back in March of 2020. And I've been looking at what's been happening. I see Alpha, I see Delta, and then I see Omicron. And Dr. Faustus has this little mathematical game he likes to play, and it's called, it's not that transmissible, but it's very deadly if you get it. It's on one hand. Then on the other hand, it's not that deadly, but it's very, very transmissible. So he can use that to make numbers, do whatever he wants to. Now, if you have one person out of 1,000 getting something and they die from it, then 1 out of 1,000 dies. But if you get 6 billion people getting the same thing and 1,000 people die, then you can make those numbers do whatever you want to. You see what I'm saying? I don't want to get into statistical mumbo jumbo, but you can always win when you're Dr. Faustus, because Omicron apparently from, and I know this research is from third world countries like South Africa, is not as deadly, and the symptoms aren't as bad as the previous COVID variants. So that's great. And I have a feeling, and I don't want to say this out loud, I might just couch my terms so that I don't get banned. But I have a feeling that if we had just done nothing, many people might have died. And then by the time Omicron swept through, it would create herd immunity, because that's what God wanted. It's an act of God when you see something happen that's from nature. That's what they call it. So the virus developed. It was an act of God. It's going to get real bad. A lot of people are going to be affected. Many people will die. But as it progresses through the natural course of human events, you get a less harmful strain or variant come through and give everybody the virus, and it's eradicated once and for all. Now, I'm not a virologist, but it seems to me that if you let nature take its course, we might have been better off. And I won't say much more about that, except changing nature is going to be very bad. We're doing it with so-called climate change, and we're doing it even with human nature. And I will just give you a little example of the human nature, besides obviously trying to indoctrinate people at a very young age to believe that the color and the race and the texture of your skin is the most important thing. And that's going to dictate your future. So that's one thing that people have to learn, which kind of goes against human nature. But let's talk about something that really doesn't have anything to do with human nature, but maybe it does. Voting rights. Now, it seems to me that, say you're sick and have to go to the hospital, and say they want to get less people to have to go to the hospital. Now, does it make more sense for people who are sick to go to the hospital and say, yes, I'm sick, I need to go to the hospital, rather than go door to door and say, do you need to go to the hospital? Now, what does that have to do with voting rights? Well, I don't know what that means, because it seems to me if it's a big problem, and if I was in charge of what used to be the government, which is now a shell of, it's a lunatic asylum, it's destroyed, but if I were in charge and I was concerned with voting rights, what I would do first, before I started making laws, is say, okay, everybody in America who feels like they couldn't vote for some reason, and they were registered, and they were just denied the right to vote, everybody send a letter, or send an email, or send a tweet to this address. And then we will examine all these examples of people being denied the right to vote, and then we will deal appropriately with those examples. We will try to find a commonality, and we will make laws to prevent it. That's what I would do. But I don't know anything. I'm dumb. But you don't say, we know that there are people that can't vote, so we're going to make laws to make sure they can, when you don't even know if there's a problem. I haven't seen anybody say I couldn't vote. So I kind of tied in a bunch of things together, because I think nature is a very important factor in how this world is going. And there's the natural functions, nature, the trees, the water, the fires, the winds, the tornadoes. I told you how the stuff is our fault. And then there's human nature, which we are very quickly changing into a hybrid of some unholy entity, which I'm not really looking forward to being part of. And then there's just nature you know, your mind, um, how we deal with our ailments, and things of that nature. And I'll leave it at that. I'm sorry. It was horrible. I'll put this down as probably one of my worst diatribes, but I gave you a little info on those vaccines. I find it funny that HIV has kind of taken a back seat and a bunch of other things like Zika, but I have a very positive note is this mRNA and these other vaccines that we've developed over the last year and are testing now might help with HIV and Zika and dengue fever and H1N1 and H5N1. So I'm happy about that. More people can have a good reason to get their vax today because a bunch of people are going to die in January, according to Petri Dish. Take heed of his word. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. I didn't really. Okay. Have a good day.